Hello everyone and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello and welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. Actually, I think today we are not going to read a sutta, so it's not really a sutta class. So to our Dhamma conversation, and I was just reflecting this morning that it has been, I think, about 1.5 years since I started teaching on this channel every Tuesday. And almost every Tuesday we've been reading a sutta. So I thought maybe today we can do something slightly different. Today I want to read a short text from the Visuddhimagga, but before we get there, I think I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of living a simple life. So I think living a simple life can be quite inspiring to most people who want to practice Dhamma. Obviously, in modern times, we often feel quite overwhelmed. We often feel quite stressed out because there's just so much going on, both in lay life and sometimes even in monastic life. Even life in monasteries can be quite stressful because in modern times, even that can be quite busy. There are just so many different things we have to do for our job and for our hobbies and for our household and for our families and our friends and this and that. So it just adds up, and at the end of the day, we can feel quite overwhelmed. So the idea of living a simple life can be very attractive. So living a simple life has also to do with renunciation. Renunciation obviously is a core Buddhist principle. To many people, renunciation can sound a little bit challenging, and often renunciation is associated with the practice of monastics and not so much with the practice of lay people. But of course, as we practice Dhamma and as we make some kind of progress on the path, we start to detach from the outside world. We start to detach from material things. And obviously, we see that actually there's a lot of beauty in renunciation. Actually, simplicity, a simple life, brings so much joy, brings so much happiness, makes life so much easier. And then we start to see that actually this is very, very helpful on the path, not only for monastics, but also for lay people. And living a simple life just makes life a lot more relaxed, a lot less stressful, frees up a lot of time for Dhamma practice. So reflecting on that can be very beneficial. And then obviously not just reflecting, but actually putting it into practice. So detaching from material things or renunciation, first of all, is usually associated with the idea of overcoming the hindrance of greed. So greed obviously is the first of the 5 hindrances, this attachment to material things, this constant tendency of the mind to run after all these sense pleasures, to constantly be distracted in the outside world instead of focusing on what is going on inside us, inside our mind. Constantly being triggered by all these things that go on outside and constantly wanting to have more stuff. And then getting very agitated and getting very worked up. And so we all know how these kind of cycles work and how, especially in modern times where there is advertisement everywhere and where there's just so many material things that are instantly available the whole time, that we feel very kind of distracted the whole time and very kind of unfocused and kind of in a daze, basically, because we're just constantly being triggered from the outside. So Renunciation usually is associated with overcoming greed, but it's not just helpful for people who struggle with the hindrance of greed to practice renunciation or to practice living a simple life. When we really think about all these material things that we have in our life, maybe we have in our house or just we have in our environment, we can also see that things are very distracting and they're also very time consuming. So it's not just to deal with greed, but it can also just be to live a less stressful life, to free up a lot of time, because all the things that we have, they need to be managed, they need to be cleaned. It's much more difficult to clean a house that is full of stuff than to clean a house that is basically empty. All the things have to be dusted, they all get dirty, they have to be washed, they have to be taken care of, they have to be brought into the house and then put away and then rearranged, and then just things need a lot of our time and a lot of our attention, and they can be very, very distracting. Let's say we come home and we think, oh, now I have time, there's nothing planned for the rest of the day, so I can just focus on my Dhamma practice, I can do some meditation, and I can read a nice Dhamma book. But then we come home and we see the first thing we see is some kind of material thing that distracts us. Let's say we see our smartphone, so we just want to quickly check the time. So we look on the display and then we see, oh, there's a notification there. And then we don't know what happens, but 2 hours later, we sort of reestablish mindfulness and we realize we just spent 2 hours on Instagram or scrolling on YouTube or something. So things can be very, very distracting and we really lose our mindfulness. So living a simple life with fewer things can also help a lot with just being a lot more focused and having more clarity in the mind, because we don't constantly see stuff that needs our attention. So as we can see, material simplicity can be very, very helpful for Dhamma practice. And also when you have very few things, when you stay in rooms that are not that cluttered, not that crowded, that feel kind of open and spacious and breezy, then also the internal feeling in the mind can be a lot more open and spacious, and you can feel more light, you can feel a lot more unburdened, and your mind just inclines a lot more to those uplifted mind states and to Dhamma practice. And so I guess, as you all know, the Buddha really encouraged especially monastics to live a life of material simplicity. So of course, since we have human bodies and human bodies are material bodies, we need to keep those bodies alive. And so in order to keep our bodies alive, we do need a few material things. We can't just completely live in our head, in our mind. So for monastics, the Buddha established the so-called 4 requisites that are there in order to support our material well-being, so that we can focus, so that we don't have to worry too much about the body and we have the brain space to actually focus on our Dhamma practice. So those 4 requisites are our robes, so clothing, something to cover the body, something to keep us warm in a cold climate, or something to cover us in a hot climate so we don't get a heat stroke or sunburn or something. So just to protect the body, some kind of clothing. The second requisite is food. So obviously the body needs some kind of nourishment in order to keep going. Then the third one is shelter. We need some place to live. In the most basic, simple kind of shelter that the Buddha allowed is, for example, living under a tree, but also some kind of simple accommodation, a room or a meditation hut, or some kind of other appropriate place to live. That doesn't need to be overly luxurious. And then the last of the 4 requisites is medicine and access to medical support if we get sick, so that we can take care of the body and hopefully get healthy again, so that we can keep on practicing. So those are the 4 requisites that the Buddha allowed or recommended for monastics, and these are 4 areas in the material world where we can put some kind of attention, where we can have some kind of material things that are actually supportive for practice, of course, without going over the top. And then there are also the so-called 8 articles. So 8 articles for monks or for nuns. These are 8 basic things that monks and nuns are supposed to have. Often they are given for ordinations. And sometimes people who, like monastics who want to live very simply, will try to have only those 8 articles and not too much else. So those 8 articles are our 3 robes. So a lower robe, this upper robe, and then 1 Sangati robe. So 3 robes, that's for the monks. For the nuns, we have 5 robes, because we also need to cover the upper body and so on. So it's actually 8 articles for the monks, it's 10 articles for the nuns, because we have 2 extra robes. So of these 8 articles, 3 are the 3 robes. Then, of course, our bowl, our alms bowl, our monastic bowl, because traditionally we don't cook ourselves. We go into the village and lay people will feed us and put food into our bowl. And then 1 belt to fix the robes so that they don't fall off. 1 razor so we can shave our head. 1 needle and thread so we can fix our robes if they break. So obviously, if you live a wandering lifestyle and you're out in the wilderness or out in the forest a lot, then there will be a lot of thorns and your robes can get holes. And also back in the day, cloth wasn't quite as high quality as it is nowadays, so it was a little bit easier to rip. And also many of the monastics used old cloth maybe that they had collected, that was already discarded, and that they used for making robes. So that wouldn't have been like the nicest kind of cloth. So that also would have been easy to break. And so needle and thread is one of the basic necessities. So you can fix your robes and you don't constantly need to make new robes. So again, that's to make your life easy. And then the last of the 8 articles is a water filter. So of course, back in the day, people had very strong bodies. They could just drink water from streams or from lakes. They didn't need to have tap water. But people still filtered the water, on the one hand, to get to get the dirt out, but obviously on the other hand, also to protect living beings that are in the water. So you filter out any kind of small living beings, such as insects, from the water before you drink it, so you don't harm another being. So those are the 8 articles, again, that the Buddha allowed for monastics and that are considered very basic necessities, because these are just things that we need in order to keep our body going. And I think many of you are also familiar with the so-called dhutangas, ascetic practices, special ascetic practices that are not mandatory for monastics to observe, but many monastics, especially those of the forest tradition, still observe them. Because on the one hand, they are said to be very good for overcoming greed and for overcoming delusion. But even people who don't struggle that much with greed and delusion, maybe people who are more hate types that struggle more with hatred, even such people often find it very beneficial to keep some or all of the dhutangas, because when you keep those ascetic practices, it makes your life very simple, and that can make your life very easy. And if your life is very easy, then your mind is very unburdened, so people find them very, very helpful for practice. So many people don't actually keep dhutangas in order to overcome defilements, but they keep dhutangas because it makes their life just very easy and very, very happy and blissful. So many people, when they hear about the ascetic practices, they think, oh, it's so much hardship, it's so terrible, why would you do that to yourself? But actually, it's the other way around. Once you practice them for a while, you realize how nice and how simple they make your life, and how blissful you feel inside if you keep them. So, for example, one of those ascetic practices, one of those dhutangas, is that you eat food only from your bowl, not from any other kinds of plates or dishes that people offer on the side. And of course, if you do that, then your life can be very simple. You don't need all these extra things. Everything just goes into your bowl and you just eat whatever is in there. So it's very easy. Everything is in there. You just eat it, and then that's it. And also washing dishes is very easy because you only need to wash one single bowl. And of course, if you are a wandering monk or nun, then you don't need to carry a lot of stuff around. You only need to carry your bowl. Then another Dhutanga is having only 3 robes, or for the nuns having only 5 robes, and not having any kind of extra cloth requisites. So for example, now I'm in Germany. In Germany, this is really, really difficult to do because we have 4 seasons and winter is really cold. So it's not a Dhutanga that is appropriate for here. And I'm very sad about that because I think it's very annoying to have a lot of cloth requisites, warm clothing, and it's so bulky and it needs so much space and it's so annoying to carry it around. But for example, if you live in Sri Lanka, then it's very, very easy to keep this Dhutanga and have only 3 robes or 5 robes. And that is very comfortable, obviously. Or another Dhutanga is, for example, living at the root of a tree. So not living in a building. And obviously that would also make your life very, very simple, very easy, because if you live at the root of a tree, you're not going to bring a king-size bed there and your bookshelf and all your laptop and computer equipment, and you're not going to run like a power cord for a few miles to the next, like from the nearest house to your tree, so you can surf the internet or whatever. So if you live at the root of a tree, obviously your life is going to be very simple. And as I mentioned, once you actually practice this for a while, and once you see the benefits, then you realize that this is actually not at all tough. Maybe in the beginning it's a little tough because you have a lot of refinements in your mind, and your mind doesn't actually want to eat everything from one bowl, or your mind actually wants to have a lot of comfortable clothing and stuff. But once you get used to it, you realize how much lighter you feel and how much more blissful you feel. And especially how unburdened you feel, because you just, you have so few things. If you want to go somewhere else, you just take your few things and you just go. You just feel very free, and it's just very easy. So sometimes people ask me, they want to practice the Eightfold Path, they want to make progress. And so they ask me, isn't there any kind of shortcut? Can't you give me some kind of tips? Because it's so difficult to practice the Eightfold Path. And so usually there's no shortcut, usually there is no tip. We just have to really, practice Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, and do the practice, put in the hours, and slowly, slowly see the path evolve. But the one practice hack that I think is really useful is to live a very simple life. That is really the one hack that can make everything else so much more easy. Because a simple life with few material possessions, as I mentioned, it just leads to so much bliss in the mind. It can lead to a much calmer mind. So you have a lot of calm, a lot of peace, a lot of tranquility in your mind if you don't have too much stuff. It can give you a lot more brain space. You have a lot more freedom to practice. You have a lot more focus. You feel a lot less distracted. And you have so much more clarity. You really see what is important. And then you can, live your life according to your own priorities instead of living your life according to all the stuff that constantly needs your attention. So that was my practice hack. And now I want to read with you, as I mentioned, a little story from the Visuddhimagga. The Visuddhimagga obviously is not an early Buddhist text. The Visuddhimagga is a commentary. So this is not a sutta. This is a commentarial text. And I know usually on this channel we don't read commentarial text, but I think we can make an exception one time. Because this story is really very beautiful, very, very inspiring. It's very cute. And I love it very much. So I wanted to share it with you. So this is from the Path of Purification. Those of you who have the book maybe want to read along. This is the book. Otherwise, it's also, I think, available online on PDF if you want to Google it. And so there is, the Path of Purification is divided into 3 very big sections. on Sila, on Samadhi, and on Panya. So this is from the section on Samadhi, so how to develop your meditation practice. And before they talk about how to actually develop the meditation practice, they talk about all the hindrances, external and internal, that can prevent you from making progress in your meditation. And so this section here is called the 10 impediments. So 10 things that can block your meditation practice. So for those of you who want to read along, this is the section on the 10 impediments. In this book that I'm reading from, this is page 91. If you have another edition or if you have the PDF copy, maybe it's another page, I don't know. But you should be able to find the section on the 10 impediments. So this section talks about various things that can block your progress on the path. And the first one is, of course, material things, especially here they talk about dwellings. So being very attached to your dwelling place, to your monastery, and so on. And so in order to illustrate this point, the text gives a very beautiful little story. So actually this text, this commentary, the Visuddhimagga, was not written in India. This text was written in Sri Lanka in the 5th century CE. So roughly 1,000 years after the Buddha's lifetime. And so this story here is also from Sri Lanka. So we don't know if this story is also from the 5th century or if this is from an earlier time, but certainly it's not later than the 5th century CE. So let's just get started with the story. And it goes as follows. 2 clansmen left Anuradhapura, it seems, and eventually they went forth at the Tuparama. So this is a story about 2 people. They lived in a city called Anuradhapura. Anuradhapura is a very, very famous city in Sri Lanka. I think, I'm not 100% sure because I'm not too familiar with Sri Lankan history, but I think for a long time this was also the capital of Sri Lanka. It was a really big city, also very famous for the Buddhist practice there, very, very famous monasteries and so on. And even in the time when this commentary was written, it was already a very, very famous city for Buddhist practice. So the text here says those 2 men left Anuradhapura. It doesn't mean that they actually left the city. They left lay life in Anuradhapura and they joined a monastery. So they left the home life and went forth into homelessness. That's what the text wants to tell us here. And so they went forth at a place called the Tuparama. Tuparama means the monastery with the stupa. So the word tupa is the Pali word for stupa. Stupa is the Sanskrit word. And so this is a monastery that has a very, very famous stupa, as we will see later on in this text. So both of them became monks in this Tuparama. One of them made himself familiar with the 2 codes, and when he had acquired 5 years seniority, he took part in the Pavarana and then left for the place called Pachina Kandaraji. So of those 2 newly ordained monks, one of them learned the two codes. So what are the 2 codes? Usually in the early Buddhist texts, the 2 codes means that you learn the patimokkha's, so the rule sets for the monks and the rule sets for the nuns. There are 2 patimokkha's because there's one for the monks and one for the nuns. Here the sub-commentary to this commentary says that the 2 codes means he learned the summaries of the entire Vinaya and the summary of the entire Dhamma. That sounds a little bit challenging. I'm not sure, but it seems that the monk was quite well learned in definitely Vinaya, maybe also the suttas. So, and when he had acquired 5 years seniority, he took part in the Pavarana. So usually when you become a monk, then you have to stay with a teacher for the first 5 years. You can't just randomly go here and there and do whatever you like. And the reason for that is that you should really make sure that you get a proper training. So the teacher is responsible for you to look after you for 5 years. Make sure that you learn everything you need to learn as a monastic. You learn about the monastic rules. You learn about proper behavior. You learn about the Dhamma. And about meditation and all these kind of things. So for 5 years, you get a really proper education as a monk. And for that time, you have to stay with your teacher. And then those 5 years are not counted in like solar years as we count them nowadays. They're counted in so-called vasa, so in rains retreats. The rains retreats is every year, roughly from mid-July to mid-October, depending on the lunar cycles. And so technically you can have 5 years seniority if you've been a monk for 4 years, and 3 months if you've been ordained just before one of those vasas, those rains retreats starts. And on the last day of the rains retreat, there's the so-called pavarana ceremony that ends the rains retreat. So when you have taken part in the pavarana, means you have gotten your seniority, your 1 extra year seniority. So this monk takes part in the pavarana, and then he leaves for Pachina Kandaraji. And what this tells us is that basically the moment he had 5 years seniority, he left the place. So the first minute that he could leave his teacher, he immediately left Anuradhapura, and he immediately left this monastery and went traveling and went to this place called Pachina Kandaraji. So he was really, really, really keen to get out of there. So because just after the pavarana, when he got 5 years, then he left. And the other stayed on where he was. So now, when the one who had gone to Pachina Kandaraji had lived there a long time and had become an elder, he thought, this place is good for a retreat. Suppose I told my friend about it. So the one who was gone traveling, who went to Pachina Kandaraji, he apparently stayed there for a long time, and he became an elder. So an elder, that means he became a thera, and that means he has at least 10 years of seniority. So he must have stayed in Pachina Kandaraji at least 5 years. So he hasn't seen his friend for at least 5 years. And then he thinks, oh, this is really a good place for practice. It's so peaceful. This is a good place for a retreat. So my poor friend is still stuck in Anuradhapura, this big city. It's so noisy. Typically in these really large monasteries, a lot of stuff is going on. Lay people come and go the whole time. As we have also heard, there is a big stupa in this monastery. So people like to come and make offerings to that stupa and do a lot of ceremonies and chantings there. So it's quite noisy, quite busy. And obviously, since this is a really large city, probably the monks are also quite busy going out, doing ceremonies in lay people's houses. And also lots of visitors would come and want to chat with the monks. And there's probably just a lot going on. And so definitely it wouldn't have been as peaceful as Pachina Kandaraji. So he thinks, let me go back and tell my friend and invite him to go to this peaceful place here. Because he thinks that the friend obviously can't practice properly in Anuradhapura. So he set out, and in due course he entered the Tuparama. As he entered, the elder of the same seniority saw him, went to meet him, took his bowl and robe, and did the duties. So he goes back to Anuradhapura, to the monastery with the stupa, and his friend hasn't seen him for 5 years, but he apparently sees him as he comes in. So he goes out to greet him, and as it was customary, or it still is customary in monastic circles, he takes his bowl and robe. So he takes his travel luggage, because obviously the other person has been traveling on foot, and it must have been quite a long distance, so he must have been quite tired. And then he did the duties. According to the monastic code, there are a lot of duties that you have to perform if there is a visitor in your monastery. So, for example, you should offer him a drink, water to drink, some refreshments, water to wash the feet. You show him where the Buddha statue is, so he can bow to the Buddha. You find out who of the two is the more senior, the one who's visiting or the one who's staying there, so that they can pay respect. Whichever one is the junior one can pay respect. And then obviously you would make sure that the person is okay. You give them a lodging, place to stay. You explain how to go an alms round, which places are good places, which places are unsuitable. You make sure they're not sick. You make sure they have everything they need. It's very important to do this, number one, because this is obviously laid down in the Vinaya, but also in order so that people can integrate well into an existing community, so that there's not much friction, there are not many tensions, because the new people don't know what to do. So basically what the text tells us here is they're very friendly to each other and they're taking good care of each other here. So then the visiting elder went into his lodging. He thought, now my friend will be sending me ghee or molasses or a drink, for he has lived long in this city. So obviously it seems to be afternoon. In the afternoon, people can't eat anything, but there's still things that are allowable as kind of a small snack in the afternoon. So the so-called afternoon tonics or afternoon allowables. And now this visiting elder expects that his friend will send him some kind of snack, because the friend obviously has been living there for more than 10 years. So the visitor expects that he has a lot of friends and supporters, and they constantly bring him some kind of stuff. Because he's an elder, and obviously elders should be looked after well, and they usually have access to a lot of luxurious things. And so he's thinking to get ghee or molasses or a drink. All these are allowable in the afternoon. Ghee is some kind of butter, and molasses is some kind of sugar candy. So a form of sugar that is in the form of lumps, so you can eat them like candy. Or a drink. So he's sitting there in his lodging and expecting to get some kind of snack delivered. But he got nothing that night. In the morning, he thought, now he will be sending me rice gruel or solid food sent by his supporters. When he saw none, he thought, probably there's no one to bring it. No doubt they will give it when we go into the town. So already in the afternoon, he didn't get anything. Then it's the next morning, and again, he expects to get food, nice food delivered. But again, no food arrives. So he again is trying to come up with some kind of excuse. How come nobody's looking after him? And he thought, then he thinks, probably they have prepared all these nice foods in their house, but for some reason there was just nobody available to bring it to the monastery. So they're waiting for us at their houses, and when we go into town on our alms round, they will shower us with all their nice food. So let's see what happens. Early in the morning, they went into the town together. When they had wandered through one street and had gotten only a ladle full of gruel, they sat down in a sitting hall to drink it. Then the visitor thought, perhaps there is no individual giving of gruel, but as soon as it is the time for the meal, people will give special food. So then it's actually early in the morning, so they go on alms round for their breakfast meal. But they go through an entire street and they get almost nothing. They get one ladle full of gruel, so one ladle full of rice porridge. One ladle actually is very, very little. I don't know how much. It's probably like half a cup or something. So that is their breakfast meal, half a cup of some kind of rice porridge. And they're not even invited into any kind of house to sit down and to have their meal there. Instead, they have to sit in a public sitting hall to eat their breakfast. So nobody's paying any kind of attention to them, and nobody has offered any kind of special food. That's quite unusual. That must have been quite unusual for the time. It's also quite unusual nowadays. Any monastic who has been to Sri Lanka and has gone on Pindapata there knows that you will absolutely be showered with stuff. It's absolutely inconceivable that you go down one entire street and nobody pays any attention and you don't get any food. Usually going on Pinapata in Sri Lanka is really like a fitness exercise, like really heavy weightlifting, because you just get so much stuff that you don't know how to carry it back to the monastery. So that, at least that's my experience in Sri Lanka. So really here in this case, seems like nobody's paying any kind of special attention to them. And then the visitor thinks, well, there is no individual giving of gruel or rice porridge. So again, he's coming up with excuses. How come nobody has offered any kind of luxury food? And then he thinks, as soon as it is time for the meal, people will give special food. So time for the meal means time for the actual dana meal, what we in modern times would normally call lunch. So breakfast actually is usually not considered a meal. Breakfast is usually considered just a medicinal drink. Especially in monasteries that are strict, there is one meal a day. That is the dana meal. That is lunch. So that is what he's talking about. The time for the meal is the lunchtime. And then he thinks people will give special food. But when it was time for the meal, they ate what they had got by wandering for alms. So again, nobody is bringing any special food. They again have to go on alms round and they just randomly collect random stuff from random people. And there's no luxury food. There's nothing specially prepared for the monastics. People just share whatever they have in their houses. So now the visitor has no more excuses to make. So he asks his friend, "Venerable sir, how is this? Do you live like this all the time?" And the other says, "Yes, friend." And then the visitor says, "Venerable sir, Pachina Kandaraji is comfortable. Let us go there." So the visitor can't believe that his friend is living in this really very basic, very simple life or simple way all the time. But his friend says, "Yeah, I live like this all the time." So this, even though he is an elder, even though he has lived in this city for a long time, he probably could have made a lot of friends and acquaintances. He probably could have gotten a lot of support if he wanted to, but he preferred to have this really very simple life where he's not entangled with anyone, where he doesn't need to make compromises for anyone. He just goes on alms round whenever he feels like it, and he just eats whatever he gets. And the visitor is quite shocked, because obviously he thought that he lives very simply in Pachina Kandaraji, in his retreat place, and he thought that Anuradhapura is very big and very luxurious. And now turns out that his friend is actually living a lot more simply than he himself. And then he says, "Pachina Kandaraji is comfortable, let us go there." So now, as we see, there's no more mention of Pachina Kandaraji is a really good place for living simply and for going on retreat. Now he says Pachina Kandaraji is a lot more comfortable than here, so let us go there because the food is so much better. So he suggests to his friend to go to Pachina Kandaraji. So now, as the elder came out from the city by the southern gate, he took the Kumbhakara Gama road, which leads to Pachina Kandaraji. The visitor asked, "But Venerable sir, why do you take this road?" And his friend says, "Did you not recommend Pachina Kandaraji, friend?" And the visitor says, "But how is this, Venerable sir? Have you no extra belongings in the place you have lived in for so long?" And the friend says, "That is so, friend. The bed and chair belong to the community and they are put away as usual. There is nothing else." So they come out from the city as they finish their alms round, and instead of going back to the monastery, the senior of the two, which is the one who has lived in Anuradhapura for the whole time, he just takes the road that goes to Pachina Kandaraji without going back to the monastery. And his friend can't believe what's happening. and asked him, why do you walk along this road? And the other said, well, you just said that we want to go to Prachina Kandaraji, so obviously we're walking on this road. And the visitor cannot believe that he doesn't need to go back to the monastery to pick up his extra belongings, to say goodbye to the community, to clean out his room. But the friend says, well, I cleaned my room this morning as I always do. So that is what is usually part of the monastic training in most monasteries, that everybody cleans their room in the morning, that you leave the room in such a state that anybody could move in there at any time. Often this is a reflection that we could die anytime, and if I die today, then I don't want to trouble the other members of the community to clean up my mess. So we leave the room as though we don't come back. That is very often a training in many monasteries. So in some monasteries, they even fold away the bed. Obviously, on the one hand, in order to have this reflection, maybe I'm not coming back, but also because if you do come back during the day, then if the bed isn't there, if it's folded away, then you don't have this internal urge to lie down and to have a nap. So it again fosters commitment to practice and overcoming sleepiness. So this is a very typical practice, even nowadays in many monasteries, especially the forest monasteries, that you will leave your room in this way. And then he also says the bed and the chair, so the furniture in the room, anyway, it belongs to the Sangha, so it's not my personal stuff. And he has put them away. He has cleaned up properly before he went on alms round. So anybody can use this room. It's completely ready for the next person. And he says, there is nothing else. So he doesn't have any other personal belongings that are stored in this room. So that's pretty amazing. I think this is really an inspiring goal to have. So I think that is very, very beautiful. And then the visitor says, but Venerable Sir, I have left my staff and my oil tube and my sandal bag there. And the other says, have you already collected so much, friend? Living there for just one day. And the other says, yes, Venerable Sir. So actually the visitor who has been there only for one day has already collected various things, his staff and his oil tube and his sandal bag. And the one who has lived there for 10 years still hasn't collected any kind of material possession. So even though, I mean, if we have a look at the visitors' material possessions, it's still really, really very simple. So usually even that should be very inspiring. But obviously it's not quite as inspiring as the person who has lived there for 10 years, still after 10 years hasn't collected anything, hasn't gotten entangled with anyone, is completely unattached internally, is just really as free can be, doesn't even need to go back to say goodbye. He can just go on alms round and just decide to not return to the monastery, but just go somewhere else. So that is pretty amazing. Yeah, so then the story continues about the visitor. He was glad in his heart and he paid homage to the elder. For those like you, Venerable Sir, everywhere is a forest dwelling. The Tupa Rama, so the monastery with the stupa, is a place where the relics of 4 Buddhas are deposited. There is suitable hearing of the Dhamma in the brazen palace. There is the great shrine to be seen, and one can visit elders. It is like the time of the Buddha. It is here that you should live. So the visitor also is really inspired. He sees that his friend doesn't need to go to a retreat place because he is already living completely unburdened, even in the middle of this really bustling and lively city. So he says, for those like you, everywhere is a forest dwelling. You already live like you are in the forest. You're already entirely unattached to material things. And then he says, you shouldn't go to Prachina Kandaraji. You should stay right here. because here in this monastery with the stupa, the relics of 4 Buddhas are here. So that's why the stupa, that's why the monastery is called the monastery with the stupa, because there are the relics of 4 Buddhas inside that stupa. And that's why the place is so famous. And you can hear Dhamma whenever you want. There's so many inspiring places in the monastery. There are all these elder monks who are there. So you have access to teachings the whole time. Everybody can answer your questions. It's really an amazing place here. You live in circumstances that are like the time of the Buddha. So you should live here. You should not go to Pachina Kandaraji. On the following day, he took his bowl and outer robe and went away by himself. And then material things or dwelling places are no impediment for one who is like that. So like that elder who has been living in Anuradhapura the whole time. So the text tells us if we can live like this elder, completely unattached to material things, then obviously material things will not be an impediment to our development of samadhi. If we can live like this, then samadhi practice should be very, very easy for us. So that is the story from the Visuddhimagga. I think it's very cute. I think it's also very inspiring, big goal. And also I think it's a good measurement for my monastic practice. Obviously I can't talk about other people, but for me personally, I think it's very inspiring when people have so little, so few things. For example, my teacher, Bhante Sujato, he is famous for being able to fit all his things into one of those small monastic bags. So all of his things, including his laptop, including his sangati, including his alms bowl, everything can fit into there. So obviously that means he doesn't have much else except for those things. I think that is very inspiring. So from time to time, I check if I am able to fit all my things into one monastic bag, and it's always very stuffed full. But hopefully, slowly I get there. And I think most of you are familiar with that simile from the suttas, where the Buddha compares monastics with birds. And he says, just as birds, they just fly around with their wings as their only burden, so too monastics should only have their robes and their bowl and carry only that with them when they travel and be completely free and unattached, just like a bird. And if you live in that way, the Buddha says, then you experience internally a very great bliss, a bliss that is blameless. So that is the Dhamma talk for today. I hope you enjoyed this story. And for now, if you have any questions or comments, then feel free to post them in the chat, and I will see if I can answer them. Oh. My mouse just ran out of battery, so let's try it with the trackpad. Okay, so hello everyone. Nice to see so many people joining in. Good to see you all. Dan has shared the page number in the PDF. Thank you very much. So hopefully you were all able to read along if you wanted to. I don't see any question or comment at the moment. So maybe that's it for today then. I hope you are inspired by this story. I hope this gives you some food for thought. And if you have the chance, really try it out. See all the bliss that comes from having very few material possessions. Actually, I personally have always been very inspired by, even before I became a monastic, I was already very inspired by the idea of furniture-free living. And I've been moving around a lot during my monastic life. So I've really been a wandering monastic since I was ordained. So for me, especially, I can really feel how material possessions are kind of heavy and they're really a burden, because if you're a wandering monastic, you have to carry them around the whole time. And yeah, I just really enjoy having, at the moment, for example, I have removed pretty much all the furniture from my room except for one cupboard that is too heavy and I cannot move it. But since my room is entirely empty except for that one thing and a mattress on the floor, I really experience so much bliss, and I feel so happy every time I come into the room. And in the morning when I open my eyes and see there's nothing there, it just really gives you a lot of bliss, a lot of joy. So if you have the opportunity, just try it out for a little while, see how it feels, and try out this hack for your Dhamma practice and see if that works for you. So lots of people have posted sadhus, and Anagaka Sunya has posted a question, and she asks, monastics still need to wear coats and so on. How does that fit into this framework? So as I mentioned in the beginning, obviously, if you live in Asia in a tropical or subtropical climate, then it's very easy to only live with the 8 articles. Well, not very easy, but it is absolutely doable to only have 3 robes or 5 robes if you're a nun. And I have lived like in this way actually for many years, and I've met a lot of other monastics who do the same. You don't even, in Asia, actually, you don't even need to be a forest monastic. Even people from city temples often live like this because they just find it's very convenient and very easy, very blissful to live in this simple way. Obviously, if you live in a Western country that has 4 seasons and that has harsh winters, such as, for example, Germany, where I'm at the moment, that's very annoying because you do need a lot of bulky clothing. And yeah, I mean, yeah, there's nothing much you can do about this. If your environment is like this, you just need to wear a bit more. Still, I mean, try to keep it as simple and minimal as possible. So yeah, I think it's still there. There is a difference between the things that we need in order to protect our body, reflecting on the requisite of clothing, making sure that this is for health reasons, making sure that this is for reasons of protecting our body, and not out of attachment to luxurious things or out of attachment to have a large variety of clothing, or to make sure that you don't have to wear the same thing twice. So I know this is a thing in some countries. I think I've heard this, especially in America. I think in Europe it's not quite as extreme, but people feel really embarrassed if they have to wear the same thing twice, I think in the same week or something. And you have to change your outfit all the time. So this is obviously not a monastic reflection. So for monastics, we love to wear the same thing all the time because it makes life so simple. You don't have to think about what you're going to wear today. You just wear the same thing every single day. And that frees up a lot of brain space and makes your mind very calm. So try to keep things as simple as possible, even in colder climates. So Dan has another question, and he says, I can see the contentment with few possessions and trust in goodness, but how does living under a tree work, or the sitta's practice? Is that also something people find contentment in? So living under a tree definitely is something you can find contentment in, especially if it is a tropical or subtropical climate, again, in very cold climates, and if it is winter, that is challenging. And usually living under a tree is done in the dry season, not in the rainy season. So according to Vinaya, during the rainy season, we actually have to live under a proper roof, not under a tree. But yeah, if it is, if you live under a tree, then obviously it's very nice. There is a breeze. It can feel a lot more comfortable. In tropical countries, it can feel a lot more comfortable, a lot less stuffy and a lot less humid than if you were actually to live indoors. And it just feels very open, very spacious, and living out in nature can be very, very calming for the mind. So that can be very, very useful. The sitters practice, I think, doesn't really come under simple living that much. Maybe for some people, but for most people, I think this is a practice that they do in order to arouse energy, especially for people who struggle with sleepiness, or if people really just want to focus on their practice for a little while with like more energy than usual or more effort than usual, then sitters practice is useful, because then you don't lie down to sleep. So you sleep in your meditation posture, so whenever you wake up, you can just keep on meditating. So not all of the Dhutangas are just for supporting a simple life. Actually, Dhutangas are also designed to counteract various kinds of other defilements in the mind. Oh, and then Dan also adds, the sitters practice to me seems ascetic. I can see contentment in staying in caves and one bowl eating and so on. Yeah, so the sitters practice is one of the ascetic practices. So definitely it is somewhat ascetic. It also depends a lot from person to person. I think sitters practice isn't really helpful for many people. So not all of the Dhutangas should be practiced by everybody. So you have to have a certain maturity in your practice to undertake many of them. And especially sitters practice, I think sitters practice is very fascinating to many people because it seems so tough and so hardcore, because you never lie down. So a lot of people are fascinated by it and try to practice it without actually being ready. And then it can be very painful and somehow even harmful, because for some people, this even has kind of caused physical problems with the spine and so on, because they weren't ready to undertake this practice, or because they were too hardcore and they didn't have a proper teacher who was supervising them. So yeah, but anyway, sitters, for people who find sitters practice helpful, this is actually very, very supportive in their practice and helps them to arouse energy and keep mindfulness a lot more continuously than they would otherwise do. So it has its uses, but again, have to be a little bit careful. And then Patricia has a question, or Upasika Metika has a question, I should say. And she says, any words how to fit in skillfully as a layperson staying at a monastery? So I think as a layperson staying at the monastery, it's obviously good to come there with a mindset of wanting to learn. So with a humble mindset, and also realizing that you come into the living space of other people that are sharing their place with you. So being respectful of their boundaries and being respectful of those people that actually let you come into their basically living space, in the same way that if you invite guests into your house, you hope that they would be respectful and sort of try to fit in. The same way people who visit a monastery should try to be respectful and mindful and try to fit in. So usually there are a lot of guidelines. It's good to follow all the guidelines. And it's also good if you're unsure, then just to ask somebody. So usually most people, they are very friendly. They want to help you in your practice. They want to make sure you have a good time. So nobody's there to kind of make things difficult for you. So if you're unsure about anything, then just, ask people, and usually they will be more than happy to help you out. And then, of course, monasteries, they are places for intensive practice, for quiet contemplation. So I think one of the most important things when we go into monasteries is to be mindful of other people's practice. So to try to make as little noise as possible, to be very calm, to be very quiet. Especially when we come in from the outside, we usually come from very busy lives. Our minds are very busy. Our bodies can be very restless. And we bring all this energy into this very calm space. And we don't even really see how restless we are, but everybody else who has been in this calm space for a while sees how much noise the visitors are making. So one of the most important things is, I think, just to be mindful of, to be mindful and to try to be calm and quiet and composed. So that was the last question for today. Oh, and I know that Patricia or Upasika Metika is going to stay in a monastery very soon. So I hope that you have a wonderful time there, and I hope that you make the best of it and that you have a lot of very good and beneficial experiences there. I'm sure it will be very, very helpful for your practice, because the monastery has a very good reputation, and I think you can learn a lot there. So anyway, that's it for today. We will finish with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I wish you a good rest of the day, and I wish a good week, and I will see you all next week, next Tuesday. Take care.